Welcome to the Rock Your Comeback podcast. I'm Nicole Eaton, author of the books Rock Your Soul and Rock Your Comeback, as well as an intuitive therapist, and I'm here to remind you of your power. This podcast focuses on mindset and inviting the universe in to create a life that feels so good, so aligned, and so authentic. I hope you're ready. How do you feel good enough in your own skin? This episode, I sit down with board-certified eye surgeon and entrepreneur, the visionary Dr. Shehzad Batliwala. From being an undocumented immigrant, to entrepreneur, to eye surgeon, to hiking Mount Kilamanjaro, Dr. Shehz has literally done it all. So we sit down and talk about overachieving as a means to feel good enough in your life, how to give yourself permission to define your own happiness and success, how to create self-awareness, and how to feel good enough on your own. And don't miss this month on the Comeback Club. This Friday is our monthly live Q&A where you get an opportunity to get advice from me on whatever's going on in your life. This month is also a new masterclass on how to feel your intuition through your body, as well as we'll be touching on the emotion code and how to clear some old trapped emotions. So make sure to jump in today in the show notes, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you.
I am so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I have to tell you that it's a little bit of divine timing that you're on the podcast today, because this morning I was thinking that I am usually pretty like an adventurous person, and I always want to live bigger, and I like to have fun, and I like to do more fun things. And then I'm looking at your bio before we jump on, and I'm like, okay, so he moves from India to Texas. He starts this business that goes into several stores. He becomes an ophthalmologist and then decides that he's going to get an internship at NASA. But then he's going to climb like Mount Kilamanjaro, and now you're like doing like a beginning to a comedy career. And I'm just like, okay, so do we, is that line of like, is this driven by the desire to live big for you? Is it driven by the desire for recognition and accolades? And I'm curious for you what that answer is.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it, you hit the nail on the head. So initially it was all driven by this like desire to just be seen and heard, right? To be recognized, to feel that I am good enough, right? It's funny, right before I got on this call, I'm giving a talk at a medical school tomorrow on burnout, and how prevalent that is in the physician community. And that's how it's going to start my talk is, like in order to feel seen and heard, I decided that I needed to be an eye surgeon, astronaut, mountain climber, real estate tycoon, entrepreneur, comedian. It took a lot of work to really just come to terms with the fact that like I am good enough just because I'm a human being, right? Worthy of being loved, right? And I mean, you know this. I think I'm preaching to the choir, but when you really dig deep into this desire for recognition, all humans have it. I had it to a very significant degree because of my upbringing, right? Um, I went through various forms of um, difficulties growing up, and that just put in this desire to just feel like I need to achieve in order to prove my worth.
How
And
old were you when you moved from India to Texas?
7.
You were 7. Okay, so what is that like coming into, I mean, Texas is its own thing. Texas is its own state and experience, but coming from India, did you speak English? Like, were you integrated into
Yeah.
the stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, no, we spoke English in India as well, so it wasn't too difficult from that standpoint. I was 7 when we came, and I just remember like we moved around a whole lot for the first 2-3 years of being in the US, and then finally settled in Texas. And I just remember like being very like lonely, Like I had a lot of friends and things like that back home in India, and just a brand new world, you know. I mean, yeah, I spoke English, but it was, you know, it was like with an Indian accent, you know. And so you just don't fit in, right? Right out the gate. And so I think that had a lot to do with it, with just feeling isolated and just feeling like I didn't belong.
Did that change? Did that morph, or how did that impact you if it didn't?
Yeah, I mean, eventually it changed, but you know, not until, to be honest with you, in the last like 3 to 4 years is really when I've had awareness of all of these things, right? I mean, for my entire life, like from 7 up until, you know, when I was 30, 31 years old a few years ago, I've just kind of been in survival mode.
Okay.
And so when you're in survival mode, you don't really have time to like think about these things, right? Like, why don't I feel like I belong? Or, you know, why do I have this desire to feel, recognized? You just don't have time to think about those things. My mom had mental illness, has mental illness, and you know, thankfully she's doing a lot better now. But in my early years, like I felt a lot of pressure because I was her main caregiver, right? And so that puts you in survival mode. When my parents came here from India, they didn't apply for the green card. And so our family became undocumented. And so, you know, kind of managing that entire immigration process was really sort of my responsibility. And so that puts you in survival mode, right? And not only that, but you're also trying to like figure out how to help the family out with finances, and at the same time trying to, you know, kind of figure out what I want to do with my life, right? Which I didn't even, I couldn't even tell you that like going into medicine was like this active choice that I made, right? Out of like passion or anything like that. It was just something that I made because I knew that my parents expected high achievement. And obviously, doctors, you know, that's a noble profession. That's a very coveted profession in society. And doctors make money, and finances were tight. And so my decisions early on were all based in like survival mode, right? Um, and so yeah, I mean, just over the last literally 3 to 4 years, when I hit my breaking point of just burning out in medicine, right? Going through like this 13-year long process, and not even feeling good about the fact that I'm an ophthalmologist, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, on paper I looked really good and I'm doing, you know, really good things for people, but on the inside I just wasn't feeling it. And so really when I took a step back to unravel all of that is when I came to a better understanding of who I am as a person and where I belong, right, in life. Um, so
You're saying what so many people feel, right? As I did the stuff I thought I was supposed to do. I did the stuff for the survival mode of like helping out my family. And then I got there and I was like, well, this isn't quite how I thought it would feel or be or experience. And what led you to doing a little bit more soul searching in that space that you got there and you're like, shit, this is not it?
the hard thing to talk about, but basically, you know, my wife leaving, right? So I was married 10 years. And I've been divorced now. And when I came home one day, this is like right after the pandemic, she wasn't there, right? She wasn't there. And that was my bottom. Um, that really caused me to just like look at myself in the mirror and just see who I had become, right? So caught up in just trying to like prove my worth every chance I got, right? I was so driven from a career standpoint because that was my identity. That is how I, you know, defined my worth, right? As a doctor, as an ophthalmologist, as someone who um is good just in that line of work. I was married 10 years. I met her in high school, right? And so that was a big shock to me. So I basically went on I took like some time off. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna pull the plug on everything. Screw this, right? I gotta figure out what's going on. So I went on this retreat for like 33 days, which was absolutely life-changing, right? I was with like 8 other guys, with like world-class therapists and just all the support that I could ask for. And all I did every day was talk about feelings, right? It's all I did.
Left survival mode. That's a lot of days to talk about
All
feelings.
I did was talk about feelings. And that was so helpful, right? Because we live in this world where like we don't do a good job of talking about how we feel, right? We're good at really numbing our feelings, right? With social media, with this phone that just keeps going off all the time, right? And so part of the retreat was a digital detox, right? You couldn't use your phone for more than like 30 minutes a day, or any form of technology. So what that did for me was that helped me to really like dig deep and get in touch with my emotions. Why wasn't I happy? How was I defining happiness? Did I even know what that meant for me? My entire life I was doing things for others, right? For my parents, for society, right? Because in return I got this validation, right? But I never did things really, if I really think about it, if I'm really gonna be honest with myself, I never really did things for me. I never asked myself, what do I want? Right. And in that 33-day period, I got to really get in touch with myself. That helped me build a lot of self-awareness, right? Like I have a ton of self-awareness now. Um, but I had none of it when I was going through the ringer, right? I was just kind of going through it. So that was my rock bottom. That's what did it for me. And we're still my ex and I were still good friends and talk all the time. Like her leaving probably was one of the best things that she could have done for me. It was a gift,
Wow.
right? I didn't realize it at the time. At the time I was pissed off, right? But if I'm gonna be honest with myself, like I needed that. I needed that kick in my butt to figure out like what the hell I was doing, right? So, I always say kind of jokingly, but really not, that she kind of saved my life, you know.
Sometimes we need that big catalyst to shake us up because especially when like I think of survival mode as autopilot. We're just going, we're just doing,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
and there's not time for that self-reflection and there's not time to look at what we're doing and create awareness around what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think that's the big thing that I'm hearing you say is like, it was like I was
Why?
doing all this stuff, but why the hell was I doing it? It wasn't because I wanted to do it. It was because maybe I felt the pressure of other people, or I felt the pressure of the culture, I felt the pressure of my parents, or I felt the pressure of whoever else that I was trying to say, hey, I'm like worthy and I'm good enough and I'm good at things and I contribute and I'm valuable. And I think we all have that to an extent of like, I think a biggest human desire is needing and wanting connection and needing and wanting to feel seen and valued. And
Absolutely.
so I'm wondering throughout that process, and for anybody listening who's in that mental space of like, I want to be seen and valued and I want to feel connected. How did you get to the point where you were feeling like I don't have to search for good enough? Like, I think knowing, oh, I'm good enough as I am is different than feeling that you're good enough as you are.
Absolutely. And I'm very good at like intellectualizing those things, right? Like I get it, but it's been very difficult for me to actually feel those things, right? Like really truly know that I'm good enough. And I think for me, it comes down to being good at my craft, right? Like let's just talk about ophthalmology, right? Being good at what I do as an ophthalmologist, right? Like this was a very hard thing for me to learn how to do, right? Surgery was not something that just came easy to me. It was a very difficult thing to learn. And now that I'm a board certified ophthalmologist, every day, right, when I go to work and I'm helping patients see, that in itself is this like validating factor, right? That, because of my hard work, right, and my talents, and my gifts, I have been able to do good for others. And that's how I've been able to connect with my patients, with my fellow human beings, right? So that connection that you feel, that I feel from, my training that I have spent so long to earn, that's how I feel I'm good enough, right? It's not about, the likes you get on social media. It's not about like, others telling you, oh my gosh, you're so good at this or you're so good at that. It's like you just knowing that you're good and you have done good for others, and that's how you connect with others, right?
Yeah.
So for me, like that's one aspect of how I feel that level of connect. I think what I'm saying is connection. It comes to connection. Same thing with comedy, right? Um, I got into comedy to really keep myself grounded. It's kind of a mental sanity thing for me. People go to the gym, I go to the comedy club, right? But, to take my pain, right, and the lessons that I've learned through my life and be able to connect with my audience in a way that makes them laugh, hopefully, if you're good, right? That connection is how I feel validated, right? And that I'm good enough. So it comes down to connection, really, in every aspect of my life. Like you said, a human being searches for connection. That's a fundamental human need, right? But there's like true connection, and then there's like the illusion of connection, right? My entire life, it was the illusion of connection, like this external validation that I was getting, that I thought was connection, but it's not. True connection is internal validation.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Brene Brown right now and her whole theories on just connection and how you can connect with people, but when you're inauthentic to yourself, it's not real connection.
Exactly.
But when you're yourself and you're connecting with people, it's because they love you, not the version you're pretending to be, not the person you're trying to show up as, not all your accolades. They just love you when you show up as yourself. And I will live on her work forever. But the other thing that I'm like hearing you say is like when we come back to the why statement of like you got to the point and you're why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I don't feel good enough. I don't feel valuable enough. And I think that we can separate it. How do I know I'm doing this all for a higher purpose, for a bigger purpose? And the question comes down to, well, why? Are you doing it for your ego, to soothe it, to make it feel validated, or are you doing it for service? And I think for me, it can be hard with social media. If you're trying to push stuff out on social media, like any kind of creator, it can feel really bruising to your ego. Like it can start as an act of service of I just want to share this information. And then it becomes, well, like maybe nobody cares about what I have to say, right?
Mhm.
And it can do that so fast. And so it's important to keep your why in service. And my reminder to myself is that I know that the things that I share are important and helpful to at least one person. And if one person sees that, hears that, listens to that, resonates with that, I've done my service. And so when you're coming into your life and you're trying to figure out what's important to me, ask yourself that question like, why? Why am I doing this? And what am I hoping to truly get out of it? Is it the recognition of other people, or is it the service and the joy that the service gives you? And I think you said another really important thing is that working on our craft, whatever that means to you, whether you're working on being the best mom you can be, whether you're work on being the best ophthalmologist you can be, whether you're working on being the best therapist you can be, when we progress ourselves in our craft by learning more about ourselves and what we're doing and how to do it better, I think that brings just a level of progress and joy and happiness that is untouchable. That
Couldn't
is
agree,
a real compliment.
couldn't agree more. I think we, as human beings, like we want to grow, we want to contribute, right? And so the best way to grow is to learn a skill, get really good at it, get comfortable with it, and use it to connect with others.
For you.
For you, correct. Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's got to be something that you have passion towards and not something other people hand you. I mean, it's great to get good at a skill, but if somebody else wants that for you. So I think the most important thing, I actually had this conversation with a client before we got on this call of like the most important thing you can do is ask yourself questions and make sure they're good, make sure they're inquisitive because your brain is going to answer the question. And then I really believe that the universe also answers the question. If you're asking the right questions, how do I do this? And sparking curiosity is one of the most important things to get you out of limited and rigid thinking. If you can spark any curiosity, whether it's through questions or just a shift in perspective, that's going to open doors. That's going to open relationships. That's going to open self-awareness. And that's where you get your power back. So just out of curiosity, how is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro? I need to know about it.
That was a very interesting expedition, I guess I should say. So it was 6 days up, 1 day down, and it was a 7 day journey total. And I didn't know what I was signing up for really. A friend of mine who has climbed Everest, that should have been a red flag for me to maybe
Very
take
bad one.
take his advice with a grain of salt. But he said, "Oh man, you should climb Kilimanjaro. Anyone can do Kilimanjaro. It's just a hike up." I was like, "Oh, okay. I'm down for a hike." And so I signed up and then I got busy with life. And like 3 weeks before I started training, once I looked into like the fact that it's actually 6 days up, it's not just a hike. And it's I kind of freaked out, started doing some endurance training. Um, Flew there, lost half of my luggage on the way there. So like
Oh,
all of like my, like winter stuff, all of that was gone. So I get there basically with like half my luggage. Um, all of the other people there saw me coming and they're kind of like suiting me up. Someone's let me borrow their jacket, someone's let me borrow their boots. And I'm like, okay, this is I'm gonna be lucky if I make it to the top of the thing. But I made it, I just kept going and it's just one of those things like it was such a metaphor for life, right? Like there's a saying called pole pole in Swahili. It means step by step. And that's life, right? You're not gonna make it really anywhere if all you're focused on is like the goal, right? As I was climbing, you could see the peak every now and then, and it looked so far, right? It's like, man, I'm never gonna get there. But what you focus on is just the next step, right? What's the next move you need to make in order to move forward towards your goals, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing that I learned in my life. I have this tendency to set very big, audacious goals, as you can tell, and then I get overwhelmed, right? And almost kind of like shoot myself in the foot. And so it's hard for me to make progress consistently towards my big goals. But after Kilimanjaro, I learned that you can take those giant goals, you break them down into micro goals, right, with checkpoints, and then you break down those micro goals into like steps, action steps. What's the next step I got to take? And that's how you make progress towards anything you want to do in life. So that was kind of my big takeaway.
I think that anytime you compare where you're at to where you're trying to go, that it feels like powerless. It feels so far away. How am I ever going to do it? And I'm a big micro goal setter as well, like just for today. Like I have a huge section about that in my book. Like just for today, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do to make myself feel better? What am I going to do to connect with myself? What am I going to do to work on my self-love? Like just for today. I don't need to fully love myself. I don't need to think I'm good enough. I just need to do a couple things today that support that idea. And I think that's powerful. Anytime I've gone on big hikes, that's like the most like sobering thing to your ego of like, okay, I've just gotta, but I also think that sometimes we think there's limits to what we can do. And I'm a huge fan of proving myself wrong. And it sounds like that was what that was for you. It was
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
holy shit,
Yeah,
what I got myself into.
I never considered myself to be a physical person really, right? Like I'm not, not the most physically fit, or anything like that. And I have certainly never climbed a mountain before. And so when this opportunity came, I was like, yeah, like I want to push myself, right? I want to see if I can do this. That's why my friend was like, oh yeah, if this is kind of like your beginner kind of mountain, then this would be a good one to do. Um,
I love
and
that that's the beginner mountain.
yeah, yeah, I that's maybe
Don't listen to that guy.
maybe I should have started with like a hill or something first, not mountain. But yeah, so I'm a big believer in pushing myself on all aspects, right? I mean, if you're not growing, what are you doing? What are you doing with life?
I love that. I'm enjoying this conversation thoroughly. I'm wondering if you have any last bit of advice for the people listening. Anything that's speaking to you.
Advice. Oh man, just knowing yourself, self-awareness. Like that retreat I took was life-changing for me because it allowed me to get in touch with my feelings, right? And so, not to turn this into a therapy session or get touchy-feely about stuff, but you know,
What
we
we
do,
do.
yeah, any of us do things to feel a certain way, right? If you really think about it, we're all chasing feelings. Doesn't it make sense to really be in touch with yours then and ask yourself like I'll take some moments throughout my day and I will check in with myself, right? Like how am I feeling? Like after this conversation, how am I feeling about this conversation? Because I was kind of vulnerable here and I mentioned some things that, you know, I'm still processing, frankly, right? So how do I feel about that? Am I activated? And if I am, what am I going to do to sort of ground myself? And it really just comes down to that. I think the most underrated skill in the world is emotional regulation, right? If you can regulate your emotions just like by yourself without drugs and alcohol and all these other substances out there, you have a superpower on your hands. So that's what I would say is just try to get more in touch with your emotions and your feelings.
And it comes with slowing down.
Yeah,
Talking about being a high achiever just in general, is that jumping from goal to goal to thing to thing. And if you don't have time to think about how you're feeling or why you're doing anything, then you don't have time to do it. Then you just keep going. But I'm a
exactly.
firm believer that eventually the universe is going to hand you your ass with that one and you're going to crash because it's got to jump in and be like, are you even on the right track? Are you even doing the things you were put here to do? Are you becoming a version of yourself that you even like? And I think that if you don't make the choices to slow down and to reflect, like you're saying, you're going to have an event that will force you to. And I've known so many people that have had illnesses that have forced them to slow down. I know so many people have had like a broken leg or whatever that's, some people have had major upsets in their career or major upsets in their relationships. But I really believe that those things don't necessarily have to go that way unless we're so avoidant of our own shit that it forces us to go that way.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's going to happen one way or the other. So you might as well take control of it and slow down on your own terms.
I've appreciated you and all of your wisdom here. I think you're so interesting, and I want people to be able to connect with you. How can they best do that?
Visionarydoc.com is my blog and podcast and all the social media handles. They're a version of that. So my Instagram is visionary.doc. Um,
And I will add everything to the show notes. And thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to get a copy of my latest book, Rock Your Comeback, The Down to Earth Guide to Reclaiming Your Power, just about everywhere books are sold. Join the Comeback Club for exclusive access, masterclasses, and more. And I always love to know what you think, so make sure to shoot me a DM or leave me a review. Thanks for listening to the Rock Your Comeback podcast. I hope you're feeling inspired, motivated, and ready to take on the world. Now go step back into your power. The world's been waiting for you. But first, if you could, leave me a review or share with a friend. Thank you.